Assalamualaikum, everybody. Ahmed Susi here, the Civil Rights Director for CAIR Arizona, and welcome to another Know Your Rights presentation. As I say, I'm usually excited for these. I'm very excited for this one just because this is something that we actually really don't deal with at the CAIR-AZ office, and we're talking about the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. Now, obviously, one of the reasons CAIR is here is to help people not get trapped by law enforcement trying to come to your house without a warrant or making you talk when you have the right of a Fifth Amendment. However, we don't do any criminal work here at CAIR Arizona. So it's kind of at that border of we could do so much, and then that's where you're going to need an actual criminal defense attorney. The great thing about our legal system is if you can't afford a criminal defense attorney, the government will provide you with one. So you'll always have someone there to defend you. But because I wanted to give you a full and robust presentation, I'm excited to be joined by a criminal defense attorney, the founder of the Litwak Law Group. Jack Litwak, how are you today?
It's Litwak. It's Litwak.
I apologize for that, Jack. The Litwak Law Group.
No problem.
How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you very much for introducing me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to people and kind of educate them a little bit on their Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. I think one of the most important things that you folks can do, whether you're citizens here on visa, seeking asylum, anything like that, you are still protected by the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. So I often get calls from people just asking questions about something that may have happened to them, or they may have a pending case. And one of the big things that I do is I help educate. As Ahmed said, you do have a right to an attorney if you cannot afford one. However, I am a private criminal defense attorney. What that means is you have to pay some sort of fee to retain me. What sets me apart, my firm apart from certain types of indigent defense agencies or other types of law firms, is the fact that I only take on a limited number of cases. And by taking on a very limited number of cases, that allows me to review all of the information in your case and look specifically at any type of Fourth, Fifth, or Sixth Amendment violations, or any type of due process violations that, again, regardless of your citizenship, you're protected by just being here in this country. So with that said, why don't we get started with the presentation on the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. And at any time, if anybody wants to call and ask any questions about something that may have happened to them or a family member, my information will be posted at the end of this. And Ahmed and I are close. He's got my personal contact information, so you can always feel free to contact him as well, okay? So we're going to start with the Fourth Amendment here. And the Fourth Amendment, folks, it guarantees your right against unreasonable searches and seizures. That's one of the major premise of the Fourth Amendment. And it essentially protects your right to privacy in your house, your person, your car, papers, effects, cell phones, things like that. So go ahead and move forward there. Basically, the first thing to look at is whether or not you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So one of the things that comes up often when I get calls from people who may not be familiar with the criminal justice system or the Constitution is, hey, they came into my car or they came into my house and the cops did this, that, and the third. Are they allowed to do that? Well, the first thing to look at is whether or not there was an actual search. And to look at whether or not there was an actual search, you have to look at whether or not there was a reasonable expectation of privacy. So what we just discussed in your house, your car, things like that, you do have a reasonable expectation of privacy there. So there's a two-pronged test to that. I won't get into the entire legality of that, but one of the things to think of just from a broad perspective is, would society consider the place that was searched as something that's protected or expected as a reasonable expectation of privacy? And then also there's a subjective reasonable expectation of privacy. Do you personally feel that you had a reasonable expectation of privacy in what was searched? Go ahead, Kate. And by the way, I'm assisted today by my law clerk, Kate McFarland. She'll come up and talk a little bit at the end as well. So again, some of the things that can be searched would be your home, your car, your pockets, purse, luggage, things like that. And the first thing to consider when looking to challenge something, maybe if it happened to you, right? So a lot of times I'll get calls for people who have had their car searched or their purse searched after police contact, their backpack searched after police contact, or their home. The first thing to consider is, do I have standing? That's a legal term. Do I have the ability to challenge the search that occurred in my situation? So some of the examples to consider, folks, are a lot of times if you're a passenger in a car, cops will find an excuse to search your car. Sometimes the driver just may consent to allow a search of their car. We're going to get into that in a second. But then somehow maybe the cops end up searching your stuff. They search your purse. If you're in a car and the cops find something in the car and you're later charged for anything that was found in the car, you have standing, even if you're a passenger, to challenge the search. If the cops search your bags, your backpack, you have standing to challenge that. If you're an overnight guest in somebody's house, you're staying in somebody's house as you're here visiting, or maybe you're here on a visa, or you're seeking asylum, and you refuse consent to a search of your room, specifically when the cops are searching the house, you would have standing to challenge any type of search to your room. Go ahead. So some of the examples of things that may not be a search. So sometimes people will call me and say, hey, this happened to me. I don't really understand how the cops are able to do this. The FBI, for example, will sometimes go through people's garbage, right? Garbage, because it's placed on a curb or it's outside of the house, it's considered abandoned property. So the FBI, under the laws in this country, are entitled to search your garbage typically. Things like backpacks or bags, sometimes somebody will say, well, I don't know who left that backpack or bag there, and the cops may consider that abandoned. They're most of the time entitled to search abandoned property. Other things that aren't necessarily considered a search would be something like a dog sniff outside of your car or your luggage. If you have any type of identifying features on your face, if a cop takes a photo of you, that's not typically considered a search. So they're allowed to document that if they don't have to move, a hat or any type of article of clothing, that's not considered a search. Let's go ahead. The next thing to consider when you're calling somebody is, was there a state actor who conducted the search? So a state actor would be somebody like a cop or somebody acting on behalf of the government, okay? Somebody who wouldn't be a state actor would be somebody like a security guard. So a big thing that I recommend is, if anything ever happens and you are being accosted by a security guard who's claiming maybe you stole something from a store, they claim you shoplifted, do not let them, obviously don't physically fight with them in any way, but do not let them search your things. You tell them, I do not consent to you searching. And they're going to have probable cause, which we'll get into later on, the cops will, to search that article, like a backpack or something, if they show up to the store where they claim something was stolen. But don't ever let somebody search your stuff. A lot of times, the way that this comes to me, and I know I've talked to Ahmed about this previously, is where DCS, the Department of Child Services, gets involved, and they'll come in and they'll want to search certain types of things. So I work in conjunction with other attorneys in town as it relates to DCS investigations. And if anything ever comes up like that, you can always call a criminal defense attorney, because I never ever advise allowing anybody to come in and search your things, because there's a lot of particular things that need to be looked into as it relates to what kind of actor the person was when they went and conducted the search, okay? So the other big thing, the Fourth Amendment protects you from warrantless searches, all right? So the first question is there a warrant? If a cop shows up, if the FBI or a cop shows up to your house, Homeland Security shows up to your house or your vehicle, and they say, hey, we're gonna search these things, you need to ask them to see a copy of the warrant, all right? They have to provide you with a copy of the warrant. Some of the simple things to consider when talking to your attorney is the warrant supported by probable cause? So probable cause it's a lower standard. In America, we have, and in Arizona, obviously, we have different burdens of proof at trial. In civil cases, you have preponderance of the evidence, which is 51% to 49% did something happen. A tip of the scale about like a feather's weight. And then from there, you've got clear and convincing evidence, which is the burden the government has to prove to seize your kids, to take your kids away from you. And then beyond that is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest burden in our system. Going all the way back, lower than preponderance of the evidence is probable cause. And that's, did something probably happen? Okay, that's the simplest way to put it. And that's what's required for a search warrant. A cop has to fill out an affidavit basically swearing to the certain facts, the particular facts, and then a judge has to sign off on the search warrant. They have to describe the particular place to be searched, like, you know, a certain area of the house or a house in general. They'll describe the address, they'll describe the characteristics of the house, your phone, your electronics, things of that nature, all right? If there is a warrantless search, meaning if a cop searches your place, searches your house, searches your car, searches your phone, things like that, that search can be challenged because the search is per se, meaning it just right away considered unreasonable, unless there's a certain type of exception that applies. And there's a lot of exceptions that apply. So a lot of times I'll get calls from folks who aren't familiar with the criminal justice system who will say, you know, I don't understand, they searched my place, but there was no warrant. I think they violated my rights. Well, there's a lot of different exceptions. And a big thing that I want to talk about right now, we're going to get into them, is one of the biggest things that I always see is people consenting because they feel that the cops, you know, if the cops ask, can I come in, can I search this? Can I take a look inside your house? Can I take a look? Can I do this? Can I do that? And the cop's being buddy-buddy with you. The cop may be real nice, but you don't ever have to consent, and you should never consent. You have a constitutional right by being in this country to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures. And if they don't have the probable cause and a warrant to get that, or another exception doesn't apply, don't ever consent. You have no reason to subject yourself to that. And I'm going to give you an example as to why. I had somebody call me recently who had reported a crime, and an officer afterwards claimed that they didn't think the crime actually occurred. They think that this person who called it in left the scene. The cop shows up to this guy he's essentially a victim. They show up to his house and they make him strip down to his underwear outside of his house in the public. And he felt like, because he's never been around cops before, and this is somebody who had a really great job and has lived in this country his whole life, he felt like he had to do what the cop said. And you don't ever have to do that. And if you think about it, that's a humiliating situation. But in any sense, you don't ever have to let somebody search your things. You don't have to be humiliated or subjected to that. So I want you to know now, you don't ever have to consent. All right, let's go through some of the warrant exceptions that would apply. But before we do that, let me just go through a couple things. Whether or not you contact me or you contact another attorney or you get assigned a public defender for your criminal case if you're charged with something, the search warrant, if there is a search warrant, can be challenged. There's many ways to challenge the constitutionality of a search warrant, all right? And I take cases over from a lot of other attorneys throughout the state of Arizona. I practice all throughout the state. And there's a lot of attorneys who don't look to challenging the search warrant. I get cases that sometimes are 3-4 years old where their attorneys didn't do anything for them in their cases. And you really need to be the one sometimes who's asking your attorney, hey, what about this? What about that? Because you're paying these people a lot of times, if you are paying them and you're not appointed an attorney, you're paying them a lot of money and this is your life. So some of the things that you can document or take note of that can be challenged is whether or not the search warrant affidavit had a search warrant affidavit being the cop's statement about probable cause, whether or not it had any type of material omissions, meaning it's missing anything, right? So if there's a big fact where maybe you weren't even living in the state at the time and somehow they get a search warrant for your place, it'd be a big fact that you weren't living in the state at the time. If that's omitted from the search warrant affidavit, your attorney can challenge that. If the cop lies in the search warrant affidavit, if they make false statements about information that they claim supports probable cause for their search warrant affidavit, and that happens, it's called the Franks motion. You can challenge that, and you can get an evidentiary hearing. It's basically like a mini trial where you get to put that officer on the stand and question them about what they put in the affidavit. Same type of idea, any type of misleading information that's in the search warrant affidavit, you can challenge that, okay? So it's really important. Sometimes you're the only one who knows. We're, you know, as defense attorneys, we're stuck with looking at what the state has, right? Their police reports, what they're claiming is going to support their case. It's really important to work with your attorney early on to describe and be honest about everything that's, you know, either potentially true or not true within the search warrant affidavit, so they can effectively challenge those things. Some of the other things are whether or not the search warrant affidavit or the search warrant is overbroad, whether or not it's particular enough, right? So sometimes, specifically as it relates to cell phone related information. So I've had cases where a person's cell phone is seized and later on it's searched. If the person doesn't have any affiliation with the, you know, originally not enough information in regard to their cell phone related to the overarching crime that they're accused of being committed or accused of committing, then you can challenge that if it's not particular enough. If there's an obvious lack of probable cause, if there's just not enough probable cause, the attorney can challenge it. If there's some sort of illegality or unconstitutional issue that brought about the information that the cop used to get the search warrant, you can challenge that. And then also the way that the warrant is executed can potentially be challenged. So long list of stuff. I guess the overall story is you need to talk with your attorneys about these issues specifically, because if you're hiring somebody, and again, it may not be me, you need to know what to look for and to make sure that the attorney is doing what needs to be done. Every case has different facts, so your case might not have an issue to challenge, but if somebody's experienced in analyzing these constitutional issues, they will tell you right away whether or not there's something there to at least challenge, okay? Let's talk about the exceptions now. Again, consent. Do not say, yes, you can search my property. Don't ever consent. The best thing to do is just politely say, and I just had a client who did this, and ultimately what ended up happening is we got all of the evidence in his case suppressed and we saved him years in prison. You have to tell the officer, just say it respectfully, no, sir, I do not, sir or ma'am, I do not consent to searches, okay? There's no reason to subject yourself to that. If your roommate, if you're living with somebody and a family member or roommate consents to a search, you should come forward and say, I do not consent, okay? If you are home and you deny consent, it could create issues that could be challenged later on by your attorney. Because sometimes we know cops may still end up searching the place, but if you do these things and you say these things appropriately, you're really gonna help protect yourself later on or help your attorney fight for you effectively. And then another thing to consider is that landlords cannot consent for their tenants, all right? The other thing here that comes up often is maybe you're in a car or maybe you're hanging out outside and the cop claims, I saw you do this, right? I saw you smoking a joint in public, or I saw you hide a gun under the bench, something like that. I saw you take property from a store and place it in your purse because I saw it on surveillance footage. That brings about the plain view or plain smell exception to the warrant requirement, all right? So if an officer says, I saw this thing, you can say, look, no, that's not there. Or if they say, I smelled this thing, no, you can say, no, I don't smell that. However, that may at that point give them probable cause to search the area, whether it be your car or your home, things like that. The home is a little bit different. But if that happens, be respectful, step aside, let the search occur. Do not fight in any way physically because you're going to bring about more charges such as resist arrest or impeding in a proceeding or anything like that. or an investigation. There's numerous crimes that you could be charged with that are often tacked on when people are trying to contest a search once an officer says they've plainly seen something. So just be respectful, let it occur, document that you're saying, or say, you know, out loud that I don't see that or smell that, if that is the case, and then let your attorney contest that later on. Let's go ahead, Kate. Okay, the next thing, this happens often too. I see it happen a lot in domestic violence related situations, but any type of arrest situation. You can be searched incident to arrest. So if, you know, a family member gets into a fight with you and there's a lot of let's just say they're just shouting, right? You're just shouting at one another, somebody calls the police and the cops show up and they're gonna make a decision at that point likely to arrest somebody. I mean, that's just the way that it happens here, at least in Arizona. In some states it's different, but it happens a lot here. And they'll plan on charging somebody with disorderly conduct. First of all, we're going to get to statements. I'm going to tell you right now, don't make any statements to police officers. But in the event that you do get arrested because they've decided that there was a disruption in the peace of other people, disorderly conduct, they can pat you down, they can search you. And what will happen is if you get arrested, you're in cuffs, they can search your pockets, and if they find anything, it's very difficult to challenge that. So what I would say is, obviously, don't do anything illegal, number one, right? But two, don't keep anything in your pockets. If for some reason you think that the police are coming, make sure that you don't have anything illegal on you at the time, in the event that they may very well make a decision to arrest you. So that is one of the warrant exceptions, just so you understand. Again, be respectful, don't fight, just to avoid any type of additional charges, and then maybe later on a good defense attorney can challenge it. The other issue is this, and again, I'm going to bring up the domestic violence type of situations. If there's an emergency situation or an exigent type of situation, that is also a warrant requirement. So a lot of times what will happen is, let's say you're staying at a hotel or you're staying at a house, and the cops get a call about a domestic disturbance or a fight. If they think there's reason to believe that somebody's actually going to be injured or that their life is in danger, and they can hear something or see something, or if there's anything that they perceive that leads them to believe that, they can enter the place, such as your house or your hotel room, to make sure nothing happens to anybody in that place, right? And if they're chasing after somebody, first of all, don't run from the cops, just terrible idea. They're going to get you, especially in the cities. All right, just don't do it. If they are chasing after you and you run into a house, they can also enter that house, and that may be a warrant exception. Anything that they observe in plain view, meaning if they can see it, if there's something resting on a table, like maybe somebody stabbed someone, if there's a knife there on the table, that's evidence that they're going to be able to seize based on the exigent circumstance or the emergency aid that they're trying to render. Okay. All right. The next thing is, police are allowed to, they can stop you, they can seize you briefly if reasonable suspicion exists. So reasonable suspicion is lower than probable cause. It's a low standard. It's reasonable, articulable suspicion to believe that crime is actually afoot or that it may have been committed. That's more than just a hunch, right? So a lot of times it'll happen in traffic stops. A traffic stop would be, they claim you made a left turn without a signal, or they claim you made an unsafe lane change, something like that. That is reasonable suspicion to believe that a traffic infraction occurred, and they can stop you, they can seize you at that point. If officers have reason to believe that you're armed in some ways, they can frisk you. Right, so they can basically run their hands over your clothing, but they can't go into your pockets unless they feel a weapon. However, a lot of times they will say, I felt what felt like a drug pipe, or I felt, what felt like a bag of drugs. And if they touch something that they believe was contraband or gave them probable cause to search further, the plain touch exception applies to the warrant requirement, and they can basically pull whatever out of your pockets if that's what they believe they felt at that time. Let's move on to the next one, Kate. All right. Another exception to the warrant requirement, again, there's a lot. How are we doing on time? Good, 1:30?
Yeah, we have enough time. Don't worry, Jay.
We're good? All right.
Yeah.
So another warrant exception is the automobile exception. So if police officers, a lot of people think about, well, what if I had something in my glove box or my trunk, right? I locked it up. Can the cops search that? If the cops have probable cause to believe that your car contains like illegal evidence, let's say, for example, you have a conversation with the cops. Yeah, I've seen this often. Cops will pull you out of the car, right? And they're really doing it to try to inspect whether or not, or detect whether or not there's any other things that you've done wrong. So they'll start with a traffic stop, they'll pull you out of the car, they'll say, I'm just gonna issue you a warning. Some of the cops will make you get into their car. First of all, don't do that. You have no reason to get into their car, okay? And frankly, if a cop orders you out of your car, before you do that, you should say, is there any particular reason why I have to get out? All right, because a lot of times now you have some dash cam. We're lucky that like DPS troopers, things like that, have dash cam that record it. So be very specific and ask them, why am I being ordered out? But if you're back there and you're talking to the cops and they start asking you, hey, look, you're a little nervous. You got anything in the car? You got cocaine, money, drugs, anything like that? Any weapons that you're not supposed to have? If you say, hey, you know, I mean, there's a little bit of cocaine, it's not mine. Now the officer gets to go into the car and they get to search the entire car. It doesn't matter whether it's the glove box, the trunk, anything like that. And the packages within the car typically can be searched as well. So that's the automobile exception. The automobile exception has a lot of particular types of issues in it. So you really need a good defense attorney who's litigated a lot of those issues if anything happens and they searched your car. The other thing to consider is sometimes you'll get arrested. You know, they'll make a decision to arrest you. Let's say it's for a DUI. So let's say you get arrested for a DUI and there's nobody there who can drive your car away. The officers will often impound your car. All right. When they impound your car, they could do something called an inventory search. So basically the purpose of the inventory search, and just so you know, that's a warrant exception. The inventory search is basically to protect them from liability, meaning if you later on claimed, hey, they stole 10 grand out of my car and there's nothing documented in any of the reports, they have to create an inventory. And generally that's documented within their operation orders or within their policy. The other thing is obviously they need to protect themselves, make sure no bombs or anything explosive is brought back into the impound yard. So if you get arrested for a DUI and they later on inventory the car, if they do it based on their policies and procedures, it's going to be difficult to challenge, but a lot of times they don't do it based on their policies and procedures. So inventory search, again, there's some unique aspects that can be challenged, but that's another way that they can potentially search your stuff. All right, and then I think we talked about search incident to arrest. Let's see. All right, if they're issuing you just a citation and letting you go, so like we talked about a traffic stop, if they're issuing you the citation, first of all, a lot of times what cops will do afterwards is they'll say, hey, here's the ticket, here's the warning. You mind if I search your stuff? Don't let them do it. Again, don't consent. If they're giving you a citation and letting you go, they have no reason to actually search you, all right? But if you are arrested, again, they can search you incident to arrest. However, they can't search the inside of your cell phone. So they may seize that and they'll impound it. They'll always, a lot of times they'll ask you for your password, or they'll try to look at the top, the top of the screen, and they'll take photos of that. Big recommendation, if you have text messages and things like that on your phone, I think there's some sort, I'm not good with the technology, but if you have like an iPhone, I know you can set it so everything you're using on your phone doesn't show on the front screen. You want to make sure you're doing that. GPS information, anything, you don't want it on the front of your screen, and you don't ever want to provide the police an opportunity to open the phone by giving them the password. All right. If officers are coming to your house to search the house for some reason, let's say there was a shooting and they claim that they think there's more people inside the house and they're going to do a protective sweep. First of all, if anything ever happens and there's some sort of violent activity, you come out right away with your hands up, lay yourself down on the ground to avoid ever getting shot. Obviously, we see everything that's been happening recently. So that's the first thing that you want to do. But enunciate and let them know that there is no one else inside the house, okay? Because cops can do a protective sweep of a house if they have reason to believe there's any type of pending danger in the house. And then anything that they find while doing the protective sweep can be used against you later on. So that's another warrant exception. Let's move forward. All right. So I think we talked a little bit about seizures. A seizure is different than a search. We just talked about searches. Seizures are, hey, they stop you momentarily. Let's say they stop you on the sidewalk to talk to you, okay? If a reasonable person does not feel free to leave, they are seized at that time. If a cop takes your phone or your purse, they've seized that thing, okay? Temporary detention, like a stop and frisk, that's not typically permitted unless they have reasonable suspicion to believe that a crime is afoot. So they got to have reasonable suspicion to continue to detain you. That's just like the traffic stop. We talked about the traffic infraction. For an arrest, again, to arrest you, they have to have probable cause to arrest you. So if you get arrested, if the cops go to put you in cuffs, you want to ask them, what am I being arrested for? Ask them once or twice. Don't get on their case, obviously, too much, but ask them numerous times, and hopefully somebody's recording, because you want to have it documented what they claim they have probable cause for. As it relates to a seizure, if you want to leave, so let's say you get your traffic ticket, you want to leave, you want to ask the officers, am I free to leave at this point? Again, that case that I just talked about where we got all of my clients, all of the evidence against my client suppressed, my client was smart enough to ask, am I free to leave? And that helped set up a phenomenal motion that we were able to get rid of all the evidence in this case. So go ahead. All right. We talked a little bit about traffic stops. Essentially what happens, let's talk about what happens with the traffic stop. All right. When they stop you, they're going to claim they stopped you for some sort of traffic infraction. My general recommendation is obviously be respectful, right? First of all, the biggest thing that you want to do is when you're driving, keep your license, registration, and insurance really easily accessible. You don't want to have to start digging through your glove compartment because they're going to claim later on that that was some sort of sign of nervousness, okay? That nervousness creates reasonable suspicion. Everybody's going to be nervous. I mean, let's be serious. It's kind of uncomfortable being pulled over by the cops. It's somebody sitting there with a badge and a gun. So keep everything ready so you can just pull it out. Keep your hands on the wheel, usually right before you get pulled over, and if you can, have some sort of pamphlet ready with your information. When the officer comes up to the car, ask specifically what you're being stopped for. If they claim it was a traffic infraction, in my opinion, if you don't think that actually occurred, you should say, respectfully, officer, I disagree. I don't believe that occurred, but if you'd like to write me an infraction, whatever it may be, then I'll be on my way. That's cool. All right, just be respectful and make sure you get the officer to tell you specifically what it is they've pulled you over for. The officer then has to immediately execute the mission of the stop, right? So what that is generally is running your license, running your registration, checking their systems to make sure there's no wants or warrants or anything like that, any beyond the lookout alerts, stolen vehicle reports, anything like that. Then they have to write the actual ticket or decide to let you go. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll pull you, especially if you're coming from out of state or if you're not a citizen here, which, by the way, you don't have to necessarily provide your immigration papers. Don't ever, I wouldn't do that. I would just remain silent. We're going to get to that in a second. But if they pull you out of the car, the whole goal of that is to just continue to question you because they see that you're not from this place. And they take advantage of that. So again, we talked about it earlier. You can tell them, hey, do I really need, is there any specific reason why I need to get out of the car? I would prefer to sit in the car if that's okay with you. If they say it is for a safety purpose, they want to take you out of the car for a safety purpose, then you do generally have to get out of the car and go to the side of the car that they've asked. But you need to be told that it's a safety purpose if you're going to get out of the car. Otherwise, you shouldn't. After you get the ticket, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll say, again, can I search? Or do you have this? Do you have that on you? Where are you coming from? You don't have to answer any of those questions. We're going to get to that in a second. But they can't continue to seize you like that unless one of two things occurs. Unless you sit there and consensually have a conversation with them, or unless they think reasonable suspicion is afoot, or excuse me, whether or not they actually have reasonable suspicion. So some of the things that they'll say, they'll claim you're nervous. They'll get information from you during the time that they're writing the ticket or the warning. So let's go back for a second. When let's say they pull you out of the car. When you are pulled out of the car and they're writing up the ticket and the warning, you're seized. You do not have to answer any questions. We're going to get to Miranda and stuff like that, Fifth Amendment, in just a second, but you don't have to answer any other questions. You should not answer any of the questions. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? What are you doing? Just respectfully, I don't feel like talking. Okay, that's what you should do. Passengers don't have to provide ID. So a lot of times cops will hassle the passengers. You don't have to provide ID. All right, let's move on. All right, so I guess the big thing is we went through all this information. What do you do with it? Talk to your attorney. Is there any type of Fourth Amendment violation? In some cases, we just talked about this, I get cases dismissed based on getting evidence suppressed because of Fourth Amendment violations. So the biggest thing that you can do is talk to your attorney about whether or not those Fourth Amendment issues actually arose in your situation, okay? Let's talk about the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment protects you from incriminating yourself, essentially, all right? You've also got the right to a grand jury, and it forbids any type of double jeopardy issue, but we're not going to get into that for purposes of this presentation. So I plead the Fifth, right? That's what you hear when you come here, right? I plead the Fifth, or Miranda. What does Miranda mean? So Miranda generally applies, or you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. A lot of times, a couple things, big tips. Cops will read it to you, they'll read it from a card, and they'll read it really, really quick. And a lot of times what they do is they'll say, look, just like you have to do a certain thing at your job that you have to do all the time, I just have to read this thing and just let me know what you think about it afterwards. They want you to just waive your right. Do not waive your right. Do not make any statements. Okay, we're going to talk about the different phases of custody. So that's really when Miranda applies. So when are those rights required, right? A lot of people call me and say, hey, they asked me all these questions, but nobody ever read me my rights, or they didn't read me my rights till way later. Miranda warnings specifically aren't required until you're in actual custodial interrogation. Okay, meaning you're in custody. So let's talk about custody. And also I should say that Miranda gives you the option of having an attorney as well. So custodial interrogation or custody, so you break it down. Miranda is required first when you're in custody. So when you're in custody, you're deprived of your freedom, right? Any reasonable person would feel that they're deprived of their freedom. So being arrested, being in handcuffs, being in a cop car, you can argue that you're in custody at that point. Obviously, you can't leave. Being in a police station. However, if you just voluntarily go down to the police station, you're not in custody if you start giving a statement like that. So Miranda won't typically be required. And I know a lot of times in the Islamic community, Muslim community, that people will be called down. I get a lot of calls from people in the Muslim community that will say, they called me down. They just want to have a conversation with me. They claim that if I go and I make this statement, it's gonna clean up their investigation. They won't have to come after me. That's not the case, especially from the FBI's perspective. If they want you to come down, they're generally locking you down into a statement. They've got everything they're going to use against you already. So if you're in custody, they have to read you your Miranda rights. If you go down voluntarily, they don't necessarily have to read you your rights. You should never go down voluntarily. You should always call an Arizona criminal defense attorney to counsel you as to whether or not you should make any statements to begin with. So we talked about traffic stops a minute ago. routine traffic stops, that's not custody typically. So if you're in a situation where you get pulled over for a DUI investigation, cop starts asking you, hey, have you had anything to drink tonight? You're not in custody for purposes of Miranda. That does not mean that you shouldn't make, or that you should make statements. No matter what, when the cop starts asking you questions, essentially interrogative questions, you should not answer the questions, regardless of whether or not you're Mirandized or not Mirandized. Just don't answer any questions other than providing your name, your ID, license, registration. Don't do it, all right? And then the interrogation aspect of whether or not Miranda applies, it's got to be a question that's designed to elicit an incriminating response. So, hey, do you have any drugs in the car? Have you been drinking tonight? Things like that are interrogated. But again, in the DUI perspective, Miranda is not required, right? Until you're actually under arrest. So we talked about it. What do you do if you're read your Miranda rights? You have to say unequivocally right away, I will not make any additional statements. So the cop reads you the card, or they start rattling off, yeah, you have the right to remain silent, anything. They rattle it off. You have to say right away, I will not make any statements. And then say, I want my attorney. The best thing that you can do is, you're not going to memorize, nobody memorizes phone numbers anymore. So what I would do is just memorize the name of an attorney, because what you can do is you can ask the officer who's potentially trying to interrogate you to look the attorney up, and then you can make a call to the attorney at that point. Obviously, be careful what you say, but just don't make any statements. Stop talking as soon as they read you the rights. And the reason for that is sometimes what they'll do is in interrogation rooms in the back of a patrol car is they'll read you your rights. Maybe you invoke and you say, hey, I'm not going to make any statements. What they like to do is they like to leave you there for hours. They like to make you sit there for hours until you just start talking. And they think that, all right, it'll happen. And sometimes it does. Just keep in mind that almost everything's recorded now. So they'll get people making confessions to themselves in an interrogation room. That's not protected just because you read your Miranda rights and said you don't want to speak. Sometimes they'll let people call family members. This is a big thing. If you're in an interrogation room and you've invoked your Miranda right, they'll try to get around it by giving you a phone to call your family member. Everything that you say to your family member, just think of it as being recorded. They're going to use that later on against you. If you're in jail, your statements are being recorded. Every single time they're being recorded, and it's not protected by Miranda. So don't make any statements while you're in the jail, okay? If you start talking again, whether it be by yourself or you start talking again to officers and you start initiating conversation after you've invoked, it creates problems with the Fifth Amendment. Any ways to challenge any Fifth Amendment violations. So just don't talk anymore. Okay. So another thing I want to talk about, this is pretty common. There's something called a confrontation call, all right? In some cases, whether it be domestic violence or any type of sex allegation or child abuse allegation, a detective will have a family member or friend call you. So let's say a family member leaves or upset about something that happens, who knows what they're going to do to you, right? You may get a call from them saying, hey, I want to talk to you about what happened. Why did you do this? Why don't you admit that you did this? This, that, and the third as it relates to a specific incident. The detective is with them, writing down the statements that the person is asking you, and they're recording the entire thing. And Miranda doesn't protect you from that. Same thing usually with officers calling you and asking you questions. They don't have to read your rights when asking you questions over the phone because you're not in custody. However, there's different arguments that can be made. I've suppressed previously a statement that was made over the phone, but it's very, very difficult to challenge. And in that case, it's specifically related to promises that were made. In that case, type of voluntariness issues. So the biggest thing is just, and I just can't stress this enough. I get so many cases that'll come in and people say, hey, can you help me? Can you do this, do that? first of all, I don't like to take people's money if there's nothing that I can do to help them, and Ahmed knows that. The biggest thing that I see that screws people over is them thinking they can talk themselves out of something. Once the police are there, they've made a decision based on the way that they operate to make an arrest usually. You're not going to be able to talk your way out of something. The best thing that you can do is stay silent, and then later on, you can, if need be, you go to trial, you can make your statement at trial. You can decide under the Fifth Amendment whether you want to make a statement or not, okay? So just do not talk. It doesn't help you in any way. The other thing to talk about here is, and I know Ahmed wanted me to talk about this, is that a lot of times the FBI or police officers will do things like, hey, if you come in, we just want to talk to you about some people in your community, or we want to talk to you about some family members. If you come in and start talking to us, you're going to be all right. And actually, we'll protect you. We'll make sure that nothing really happens to you. And obviously, there's issues there to challenge if they start saying things like that. But oftentimes, there is no absolute immunity. All right, they don't I mean, you can get immunity agreements, but you do not ever want to go into a room with an officer or Homeland Security or anything under the guise that they're not going to do anything to you, okay? Because you need an attorney to work that out for you. It's generally not going to happen, especially if there's not an attorney who's already been involved in negotiating this type of thing. So don't let them bully you into making statements, whether it be about yourself or other people. The other thing is, officers will use something basically called, I can't remember the name of the method. The Street method, I believe. Anyhow, what they can do is they can lie to you. Police officers can lie to you when interviewing you. So they'll say things like, you know, we've got you on video doing this, so I don't know why you're not telling us what you're doing, okay, or what you did. They may not have a video. They lie all the time, and they're allowed to do that. I think I'm wrong in using the term street method. I forget what the method is called. But they're allowed to use lies within their interrogation to get you to say that you did something or didn't do something. So if you made a statement, whether it be before Miranda or after Miranda, you know, it could create significant issues in your case, but you'd need to talk to your attorney to see whether or not they can challenge that. And often Arizona attorneys can challenge statements that are made, so long as they're obviously experienced in challenging these constitutional violations. So with that said, I don't know if we have any more slides. Okay, that's my contact information. Obviously, you guys should take down my name. You can take down other attorneys' names as well, but if anything ever happens, you want to have an attorney's information with you. Nobody ever thinks that anything is going to happen to them until it actually does. And then you're in a situation where you have no idea what you're doing. And by making statements, for example, that you think will help you, a lot of times you've hurt yourself. So keep an attorney's information with you. Again, my name is Jack Litwak. Feel free to keep that information with you. My phone number is in the slide. Ahmed always has access to me all the time. That phone number that's in there is my cell phone number. So again, I'm here to talk if anybody needs anything at any time. And with that, Ahmed, I don't know if you have any questions, or Kate, why don't you come introduce yourself? Kate McFarland helped me with the presentation today. I know she doesn't want to introduce herself, but here she is.
Kate, you did a great job on the PowerPoint, and I believe this isn't the only PowerPoint you made for one of our Know Your Rights presentations, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I've worked for Jack for about a year now, and he really cares about his clients. He puts in the work. You can tell he's passionate about every single person he works for, and it's just really important to have somebody who looks at these issues and starts working on your case really hard right from the start, because like you mentioned, he's gotten a ton of dismissals even in the short time that I've worked for him, just because he's putting in the work early. So it's really important to find an attorney that communicates with you and that you trust.
All right. Thank you so much. I do have a couple of things, but I first want to say thank you to both you all for making time to do this presentation. Like I said, for CAIR Arizona, we don't do any criminal defense, but we definitely get involved just because everyone understands that in our community, we are targeted for by law enforcement, right? From all the way from, you know, Mesa Police or whatever police department, all the way to the FBI. And it's not something that people might think, oh, well, you know, Trump isn't president anymore, this isn't going to happen. This has happened in the Obama administration, the Bush administration. A lot of our masjids and mosques and other Muslim community centers have the trauma of having informants coming in, sometimes people within our own community coming in working for law enforcement. And what we tend to see most of the time, I don't want to give a number, but most of the time, is there is no real threat that they're stopping, right? They'll make arrests, they'll make up stuff, they'll make those arrests, but when you look into them, yes, sometimes they might stop someone trying to go to Syria, but some of these are mostly lying to law enforcement. And that's one of the things that I want to talk a little bit in a second. But this belief that Muslims are an enemy is just Islamophobia, it's xenophobic, and unfortunately, it's something that's still within our law enforcement. Obviously, there are, you know, police officers who aren't that. There are Muslim police officers, they're part of our community. They're here to protect and serve us. But we understand the reality of it, that we get abused in this system. So I'm happy I have Jack here just because I have a couple of things. The first thing I want to say, the most important thing that I think you said today is how it's up to us, right? We have to be empowered enough to tell the officer, no, I do not consent, or no, I will not talk. And what we say here in CAIR-AZ is we're here to defend, educate, and empower our community. And I understand that, well, first of all, no one else is going to be there to say this person isn't going to consent, right? An attorney might, but when you're in that heat of the moment, you need to have that strength. But one of the things I want to take back is I completely understand what time we're in, right? Sometimes, and you said it too, you have to be respectful, right? And it's not a situation of, it's a life or death situation for some of our community members. And I definitely understand that you say, Ahmed, I want to enforce my rights, but I don't want to become a hashtag, right? I don't want to end up dying over this. And we see, I mean, just I believe last week in Chandler, a teenager was shot in a police encounter. So the first thing is stay respectful, and stay respectful might look different for certain people. It might mean that you have to completely lay down, not get up until they tell you. Some people, you know, they have a little bit more thing, but definitely stay respectful. Make sure you live to see another day. Once you have an attorney, they could start ironing out, but it has to be you to actually enforce your rights. Which brings me to another thing. You might have seen that I was sipping on our no chai for the FBI mug.
I like that.
Well, that stuff, the cups are coming to you and Kate for sure, but coming from our community, you know, a lot of us are maybe first generation, or our parents were immigrants or first generation. And we're usually taught that we have to respect law enforcement. We say that here, but that respect can be abused by law enforcement. Jack here told you that law enforcement will lie to you. I get so many calls about people who say, hey, Ahmed, you know, FBI were here. They're trying to say, you know, this person was posting this on Facebook, this person, this. And then I say, well, why did you even let them inside your house, right? And they'll tell me, well, Ahmed, we served them coffee. And this is not even something I've heard. I mean, I've had situations where I've had family members who law enforcement, FBI comes into the house, and I have family members serving them coffee, tea, just because that's our tradition, right? Someone comes into your house, especially someone who's from the government, we want to make sure we treat them with respect. And I actually got some pushback because of this, because we always say, you don't even have to open the door, right? I don't want to talk to you. Slide your card here. I'll have Jack call you back. I'll have Ahmed call you back. I'll have my attorney call you back. Or you say I have a warrant. Is it signed by the judge? Can I see a warrant? Because we saw a couple summers ago that ICE in particular wouldn't have judge warrants, right? They'll have their own documents to try to finagle the system. But the thing is when you have when you don't protect yourself, let me take a step back. I apologize. It's on the law enforcement and the prosecutor to have the burden to bring a case, right? It's not that you're making it harder on them. It's you're making them do their job. And we just saw this last couple of weeks, the ABC reporting about how sometimes law enforcement and the prosecutors will come up with cases that aren't really up to bear. And I apologize, I'm talking so much, and I'll pass it to you, Jack. But one other thing I want to mention is, in the beginning, I said if you can't afford an attorney, you could have a public defender, and that's a great thing about our system. And this is no knock on public defenders; they are a backbone of our justice system. However, if you have the funds or if you have the availability, hiring a private criminal defense attorney is something helpful. Just because, like Jack said, their attention is on you, right? They're not going to have hundreds of clients. They might have a limited amount. So it's much easier. And when you're going up against the government, you're going to need someone who has more resources. I remember when I was a clerk for a judge in Louisiana, there was a situation where the prosecutors didn't like the chairs in the courthouse. So we had to go to another courthouse. They actually U-hauled chairs from their department to there, and the person there had a public defender. They didn't have the capabilities to bring in chairs. I mean, public defenders aren't even paid the same amount as prosecutors. So it's one of those things where if you have the funds, if you have the capability, definitely talk to a private attorney. Just so if they have the capability to build a strong defense for you, it's going to be worth it. And sometimes you hear people in our community say, hey, Ahmed, I'll just talk to law enforcement. I can handle this by myself, which you can, but it's you against the United States of America, or you against the state of Arizona. Why would you put yourself in that capability? I just have a couple more points, but I'll let Jack, if you have anything.
Well, I mean, Ahmed, that was beautifully said, because one of my best friends here, Shifa Al-Khatib, I mean, obviously is Muslim, and we talk all the time about how that population is specifically targeted. And I get calls all the time about how people within that population have been targeted. And it's true, you live based on these traditions where you feel you're supposed to be welcoming, right? You're bred with that. And frankly, we live in a police state, and the government takes advantage of it to the fullest extent. You are not being disrespectful by requesting that the officers respect your rights. And by saying, I'm not going to allow you in, or hey, you got to call Jack Litwak, you got to call Ahmed. You're not being disrespectful. And you have that right. You have the right to be treated like a human being. And frankly, a lot of times they're not seen like that. They're just not. I mean, you're just seen as a potential suspect. And some of the things that I hear on body cam videos or dash cam videos, the way that people are so disgustingly disrespected, you are not doing anything wrong by saying, I will not make any statements, sir. I need to see a warrant, sir. You need to start doing that to yourself so you're not subjected to this disgusting reality of mistreatment that we've been seeing. But again, you can do it respectfully, and I obviously with the traditions that you folks have, I mean, I see that you can easily transition the respect to that request, okay? So that's number one. Two, in terms of just really briefly about attorneys, public defenders have one of the hardest jobs in the world, and they have one of the most beautiful jobs. And I was a public defender myself, and so was Shifa, who I just described. They're not paid as well, and frankly, their caseloads unfortunately are high, and they're not treated the way that they should be treated, and it's unfortunate. And there's many phenomenal public defenders. There are many phenomenal public defenders, but again, the caseload creates an issue. The same thing can be said with private criminal defense attorneys. In fact, there are private criminal defense attorneys who take on more cases than public defenders because it's all a business for them. So when you're going out and you're talking to people, obviously we're comfortable within our same culture or our same, social groups, things like that. Just really spend the time getting to know the attorney before you throw money at them, because again, I've had so many cases that I've taken over where the attorney's pushing them to take a plea agreement, to do significant periods of time in prison, or they're giving them terrible advice. Yeah, sure, let's go talk to the cops about this. And they're people specifically, especially if you're not a citizen, you're being taken advantage of a lot of times. And it's unfortunate to say that, but it does happen. So just make sure that you vet things appropriately, call around, look on, Google, talk to people like Ahmed who actually know other people in the community, and see what former clients have had to say before you hire somebody. And with that, Ahmed, I guess ask any questions that you have, because I really would like to prevent any situations where people are being shot or killed.
Definitely, no, definitely, and I appreciate that. Just a couple more things. The first thing I want to hit on the bat that you just brought up right now, we get calls too of people telling us about how they'll get scammed by our attorney. So within this description of the video, I'll have the Arizona State Bar website where you can make a complaint or at least a notice saying, hey, this attorney, you know, I paid him for X, Y, and Z. He didn't do this, or he's not taking my calls, or whatever, because attorneys have obligations and our state bar regulates our practice. So if you ever have a situation where your attorney might be not 100% up with you, or just a situation where they sometimes may, you know, abuse that trust, definitely know that the state bar has your back and you have that resource. The other thing I want to bring back is 100% I agree with you about our public defenders. And I want to get to kind of one specific thing that we do here with CAIR-Arizona. We will help you if you call us up to the place where we'll tell law enforcement you don't want to partake in a voluntary interview. But sometimes you might say, Ahmed, I actually want to. They've been coming to, because we could tell them no for that one encounter, but that's not going to stop them from coming, right? They have the right to do their job, which means if they want to come every 3 months, they can. And every 3 months, you could say, no, I don't want to talk to you. But if you decide to, you're not going to have a public defender issue to you to represent you. And that's one of the reasons why I say, talk to a criminal defense attorney. We don't represent, at least CAIR-Arizona doesn't represent people into actual interviews with the law enforcement or FBI. And that's where you want to talk to a criminal defense attorney who kind of understands what they're doing. And one of the things Jack told me when I called him maybe about 5 months ago, or sometimes, is if they're coming to talk to you, they know what they're gonna get out of you. They're not here just asking questions. They have the information, right? They're either trying to get you to admit something or get you to lie about something. And lying about something is where we get that entrapment, where I said before, because they'll say, hey, you know, lying to a federal officer, I believe that's a 5-year offense. And I believe that's what Michael Flynn got in trouble, General Flynn, in the Mueller report. So, and then they'll say, become an informant for us. We're not gonna do this charge. And we actually saw just last year a case where a Muslim man was in prison for 14 years because he, after multiple sets of 10-hour interrogations, just basically said whatever they wanted them to say, right? These are trained experts. We all see the movies, right? And unfortunately, sometimes they do stuff that they're not supposed to, but they are trained to get you to say what they want you to say. And they found out, you know, another attorney came, and this is more in the appeal process, but they came and they said, all this was not by the book, and what was by the book, this isn't even a real case. And that person was able to be set free. But that was 14 years in jail after that incident. And you're not going to get, you know, a check for those 14 years. And that's why I always say, if you decide to have that conversation with law enforcement, contact an attorney. Even if you can't afford one, talk to one. Some of them do free consults, and if you can't afford one, have that protection, because it's a scary situation. And one last thing, even if you do want to have that conversation, don't have it at their office. Definitely don't do that, because it's hard to leave those offices once you're there. Have it at the Starbucks, have it in Dunkin' Donuts, and you have the right to record that conversation. So it's a situation where I say, if you're going to do it, talk to an attorney, and I always give them. I give them your number. There's other criminal defense attorneys here, and the state bar also provides resources. But going back, make sure you understand the attorney you're getting, right? Sometimes you might see a commercial, you might, I want to go with this attorney, I see this billboard, whatever you do, just make sure you have someone who has your back. So with that, Jack, do any closing remarks or any things you'd like to say?
No, I said STREED technique. It's the read technique earlier.
Okay, read technique.
So the read technique allows them to lie, and that does lead to coerced confessions. And the other thing about informants, I mean, you know, especially in the Muslim community, you see a lot of people the FBI will come in and try to flip people. That leads to wrongful convictions because you feel that this pressure is put on you and your family to actually say something. And you know what? You're out there trying to protect yourself and your family. You may say something that's not accurate, and it's going to lead potentially to conviction of somebody else. But with that said, I really appreciate the opportunity, and really, folks, just do what you can to protect yourselves. I think looking through and listening to this whole thing and educating yourself is the most important thing that you can do. All right, take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack.